Folks, good morning. Let's start. So we're going to be talking about government today. I hear somebody's rock and roll. If it's not Led Zeppelin, turn it off. If it's Led Zeppelin, you can leave it on. I can work, talk, lecture, and write listening to Led Zeppelin for hours. And so should you. True or false, the professor's been to a Public Enemy concert. That'll be on your midterm. So, folks, we're going to be talking about government today. And, of course, I'm a fan of government. But I'm a bigger fan of government when there are citizens watching their government, when there's a media watching the government, and when we self-select the right people to be our government officials. People who are trained and know what they're doing. And those nations that can bring those men and women into government are more likely to have a cost-effective government. Because, folks, we do pay taxes. And there's always a question, what do we get for our money? Can we agree on that on a Wednesday morning? Folks, this was in the LA Times yesterday, and this is one of your required readings. So let me help you, since you haven't been doing your readings. And let's read it together, and we can read slowly. So who is your governor? The hippie Jerry Brown, who went to Berkeley. Before we get to him, let's celebrate Janet Yellen. The first woman ever has been named the head of the Federal Reserve Board. Janet Yellen, the UC Berkeley economist, has been selected. And she's a very impressive person, and I think she'll do a very good job. But folks, there may be a little bit of inflation. And so if you hold cash, keep an eye on it. But it's very big news that Janet Yellen has been named to be Ben Bernanke's successor. And for those of you interested in economics, macro policy, and if anyone's interested in women, read it, because it's a historic day. And men and women are equals. My wife out-earns me, she out-thinks me. But we haven't seen full equality. And so this is a good day. Are there any women or men in the room who care about such issues? Fair enough. And good for Janet Yellen. And good for economics. Folks, but bad for Jerry Brown. Everyone, let's boo Jerry Brown. And we are on video. Let's hear it. So he's a good governor. But I want to look at the unintended consequences of this. So yesterday, let me read you the title. And then as young intellectuals, I want us to debate the benefits and costs of this new public policy. Governor Brown has authorized, I can't even read it, authorization allows the California Public Utility Commission. Folks, the Public Utility Commission sets your water prices and electricity prices. Governor Brown has authorized the California Public Utility Commission to come up with a new formula aimed at lowering electricity rates for those who live in hot inland areas and raising them for those who live in coastal areas. Folks, I have a three-part question. Do I have to read this again? He's raising the prices in Westwood and Santa Monica for electricity. He's lowering them 30 miles east. I've got at least 5 questions for you, but I have learned that I need to speak slower, and you can't solve 5 problems in public. You can't act that crazy. Who are the winners from this public policy? You have 3 seconds. Ugh. Inland people. Who are the losers from this? Folks, are the people of California randomly assigned across areas? Did God pick me up and say, boom, you're living north of Montana. Boom, you're living in Encino. Who tends to live in the coastal area? Rich people. Who tends to live inland? Poor people. So somebody say something liberal. Why is this good public policy? Ugh. We can look it up in Wikipedia. Somebody type into Wikipedia, good public policy. Good public policy are those policies where the benefits exceed the costs. Woo-hoo. Woo. Not you. You. I see. And so there's something to be said for income redistribution. The rich have stolen their money. The poor are deserving. Being videotaped. And so Robin Hood, we cheer Robin Hood when you take from the rich and you give to the poor. So let's celebrate that. But folks, we are subtle economists, and this is a course in energy and environmental economics. Is this a logical way to redistribute money? Public finance economists have other ways to redistribute from the rich to the poor. Folks, what is an unintended consequence of redistributing income? So a question, why did he choose this way, even though this makes economists nauseous? It's fine to redistribute money to the poor. An economist would say do it in the most cost-effective way to minimize the dead weight loss. Folks, why did he choose this way? What's interesting about this way? Is it transparent? Will the rich people on the West Side even notice? So I'm very interested when politicians choose very subtle, strange ways to redistribute income. What if Jerry Brown sent his people to knock on rich people's doors and say, handsome, Kobe, I need $1 million from you because I'm going to give $10,000 to, I can't even do the math, to 100 people. What would Kobe do as this guy brings his bucket to Kobe? Kobe would call his dogs. You're supposed to laugh. If Kobe's electricity rates go up, will Kobe even notice if he hasn't taken this course? So I'm very interested in non-transparent, in hidden ways that smart political leaders with a goal to redistribute income go about achieving their goal. But folks, we are environmentalists. And you folks are looking sleepy. You can still drop this class. I'd love to get this down to 40 dedicated people. I'm always looking for a small squad who can work with me. I know the first 3 rows are with me, but I'm looking to the back rows. I'm just seeing Led Zeppelin. In the 70s, not now. They've sobered up. What's an unintended consequence of subsidizing living in the desert? Kelsey. More people will move to the desert. Folks, what environmental implications does that have? Do I have any environmental scientists here? Is that sustainable? I've got half environmental science majors. Someone not named Kelsey, who's an environmental science major, say something smart. If we subsidize living in the desert, so what? Yes? It takes a lot of energy for the air conditioning out there. How are we going to meet our renewable portfolio standards goals? How are we going to meet AB 32? Folks, a question. As we try to adapt to climate change, do we want more people living in Death Valley? It could be 120 degrees there in the future. In my book, Climatopolis, which you will read parts of later in the course, I actually argue we need the exact opposite policy. We need higher energy prices inland, and we need easier real estate development zoning in the coastal zone to encourage real estate development where it's cool, in the Santa Monicas and along the beach. So Jerry Brown, let's all salute that he cares about poor people. Everyone cheer. Yay! But there's a right way and a wrong way to go about your business. See, he heard this and he knocked this out. He's got Snowden listening to this. So folks, let me be serious for a moment because I'm glad you guys are awake. A question in public policy is, can you kill 2 birds with 1 stone? He's not even killing 1 bird with this stone. He wants to help poor people, and of course that's admirable. But this is a very strange way to go about it because it has nasty energy and environmental implications. So does everyone understand? I could have put this on the midterm, and the A answer would have been, Professor, the unintended consequence of this policy will be actually to increase California's electricity consumption, making it harder to meet AB 32's goals, and to put more people in areas at greater risk from climate change, and to increase water demand and electricity demand. Is everyone with me? There was a hand, sir.
Yeah, I have a question. So I read part of your book, and I feel like, didn't you argue the exact opposite, that people should move away from coastal cities because of global warming?
So we have to be careful. So we have to be careful. I argue in Climatopolis, which we'll talk about in our last lectures, that there's a sweet spot. You don't want to be in a flood zone, but there are parts of Santa Monica, let me call them 7th Street, that are far enough inland that, like Goldilocks, they don't flood, but it's temperate. But what he just said is true. We're going to have to, when we talk about the economics of adapting to climate change, we're going to think about what will be safe areas to live. You don't want to be in Joshua Tree, and you also don't want to be on Ocean Ave. So he is correct, and that's what I meant by Goldilocks. And we will come back to his point in about 5 weeks. Folks, if Jerry Brown were here, other questions you would have for him? I raise this example because this is a real-world public policy from yesterday's LA Times, and we're talking about government policy. So Was that a hand or an itch? Speak so they can hear you. Go ahead.
Well, during the hot summer months, when people are using too much electricity, they always ask people to use less. But now that they're kind of subsidizing it, people will be more reluctant to reduce their consumption. So, isn't this kind of backwards? Because in the future, they're asked for it to be less, and there'll be more blackouts in these regions.
So I agree with her. So she is thinking like an economist, saying that government sometimes has contradictory goals. She's saying that during summer times, the government asks you to conserve on electricity to reduce the probability of grid blackout. But through low prices in hot places, they're encouraging you to have a big house and to run your air conditioning all the time, exacerbating the risk of grid blackout. So I agree with you, and you agree with me, and we are very happy. Yes? So you might be right. You're being a very good political scientist. So you guys are asking excellent questions. My wife asked a similar question when I posed this to my family. My son didn't care, and my wife said what you just said, and take that as a compliment. I forgot my point. The whole modern political science is a serious field when you talk about vote buying. So if I'm running for president of UCLA, if I'm running for president of the student body, what do I have to give out? Do I have to give out 6 packs of beer to the dudes and give hugs to the ladies? What do I have to do to get votes? And so a politician doesn't want to pay too much for a vote because it costs money to raise money, but you also don't want to pay too little because if you pay too little, you don't get the vote. She asked the right question. If Jerry Brown knows he already has the liberal vote, but if he wants support from Republicans, one way to appease them and please them, if they tend to live inland, is to buy them off with some cheap electricity. She's being a good empirical political scientist about causal effects. Recall that we defined causal effects in our lectures. She's saying that perhaps by offering subsidized energy to people inland, that increases political support. That's a causal effect hypothesis. Very well done. Folks, we're going to finish government today, and we're going to start to talk about where factories locate. And today's going to be good. I am sober and in less pain than usual. Folks, when I took a look at our notes, I realized that I skipped a key slide last time. If I could turn back time, do any of you listen to Cher? Can we sing that together? If I could. Well done. If I could turn back time, I forgot the second line of the song. I didn't talk about what motivates politicians to do what they do. We sense that with President Obama, he's not stealing. We've had former presidents like Richard Nixon and Lyndon Baines Johnson. Folks, do you know how Lyndon Baines Johnson became a billionaire? He gave his wife a monopoly to Texas radio stations. So we've had leaders who have gotten very rich. Nixon left the White House after years of service a multimillionaire. The Obamas and the Clintons made their money selling their books. Liberals buy these books, read about Monica Lewinsky. And these presidents can make a lot of money with their autobiographies, and that's a way for their followers to hand them money. But with the leaders of Congress, what is their goal when they serve? Who are utopians who just seek to do good? Do I have any good people in the room who have devoted their lives to doing good? I bet Charles will. Charles is in back. Charles, will you commit your life to doing good? All right. I don't believe him. I think by pursuing his own goals, I think he will do social good. But so think about Kobe Bryant. He wants to be the world's best basketball player. If some people admire him, that's fine. But he had a goal. He had his own goal. There are very few selfless people who serve just to be good people. Let's put those in this category. Folks, there are many politicians around the world who seek to steal as much money as they can for their own family. If I became a politician, I'd try to steal everything I could. My son needs a lot of stuff. I'd give all my money to UCLA when I died. Can we cheer? See, your tuition would go down because of my theft. Say thank you. Now, another thing that motivates politicians is that they want to be promoted. U.S. congressmen want to become senators. In China, urban mayors want to be appointed to the Beijing central government. Career concerns are 2 words for that you want to rise in the bureaucracy. Assistant professors want to become full professors. Some full professors want to go to Murphy Hall to be deans. Those are career concerns. Folks, a key point we stressed last class is that political leaders have private information about what they're doing. Folks, a question. If you are the professor at work, if you are the head of Facebook, what do your shareholders know about your company? How do your shareholders monitor you? It's a publicly traded company. What do the shareholders know about Facebook? You can look at pictures of Sheryl Sandberg leaning in. What else can you know about Facebook? You didn't laugh. That's not good. What does Facebook release about itself on a quarterly level? Is anyone taking a class in accounting? 10K reports. Folks, the whole field of accounting is about private information. If it was common knowledge what every firm's profit is, would we need accountants? What do accountants do? Accountants are these middlemen who firms report, by law, firms report to the accountants what they have, their assets and liabilities, and the accountants write up these horrible to read 10K reports. Have any of you read a 10K report? A few non-illiterates. What accountants do, there's an asymmetric information problem. Do shareholders want to know whether their corporate bosses are working hard? Yes. Do corporate bosses want their shareholders to know what they're doing? No. If I was the boss of a firm and I knew nobody was watching me, I would just play golf and drink. Could anyone else join me? Are you all hard workers? Work 24 hours a day if no one's watching you. Folks, why does UCLA have exams? If we knew how hard you studied, would we have exams? Because you have private information about your effort, we have to have exams. Have any of you ever thought, when you begin to think for a moment, you understand everything. Because of private information, we have exams. Because of private information, we have teachers' evaluations. Because there is private information about CEO effort, we have accounting reports. These devices, exams, teacher evaluations, accounting reports, create symmetric information. Both sides of the market know. So folks, with politicians, what private information do they have? They have private information about whether they're pursuing the public's interest or whether they're stealing. We talked about last class that it is the media's job, the New York Times, the LA Times, to report on what these men and women are doing, the muckraker investigative press. That's the only way citizens can know. And folks, if you learn that a politician is engaging in malfeasance, what do you do at election time? You vote that person out. They anticipate this, and with their career concerns, that incentivizes them to pursue the public interest. Politicians pursue the public interest, perhaps because they're good people, but also if they're aware that if they don't pursue the public interest, they will be caught and held accountable during election season. Do you understand? That was the point I didn't make last time, and I'm only seeing a few stupid looks. Folks, now let me crack some jokes about diarrhea. A very important role. So today's lecture in last class was about government's role. We made a big deal last class about pollution permit markets and pollution taxes. The steel factory had a negative externality. A way to internalize the externality is either to have a pollution tax or to have a pollution permit market. They both incentivize the firm to recognize the social costs of its pollution and to try to reduce that, to hire IOE students to hire IOE students to take a look at the production process to try to reduce waste. Folks, another thing that I love about government is information regulation. Everyone say those words. Now, my former students who are in the room can take a nap because they've already heard this. But I want to talk about Phil Leslie's most famous paper, and I want to talk about diarrhea. Can we talk about this? Is anyone over the age of 13? Has anyone ever had, well, I have. Folks, do any of you eat at C-rated restaurants in Los Angeles? So I assume everyone knows how to read at UCLA. Do you know the letters A, B, and C, and not as your grades? Have you ever walked up to a restaurant and seen an A, B, or C? Folks, is it written in the Constitution that restaurants have to hang those things? No. Thomas Jefferson did not write that into the Constitution. In the 1980s and 90s, Los Angeles had a diarrhea problem. Do you find that funny? I kind of do. Folks, how did public health experts solve the problem? What was the problem? Do folks like eating at restaurants that make them sick? Then why did they go to them? You have 3 seconds. On an exam, people don't like to get sick, but they go to restaurants that cause diarrhea. Is this a puzzle? Explain. 5 points. Type into Wikipedia, diarrhea, problem. Use your minds. What goes through your little brains? You can talk either on the supply side or the demand side. We're economists, and you're becoming faster and faster. If you're not getting faster, drop the class. I will find a new set of recruits. You. So the low quality, so the restaurants, so why were they cheaper?
Because they have low cost.
Good. So as he just said, on the supply side, folks, do restaurants have an incentive to be, what does it take to be an A restaurant in terms of public hygiene? What costs do you have to incur? Have any of you ever killed a mouse before or cleaned a toilet? I've done all of that. Is that fun to do? Is that a sexy thing to do? It takes effort and money and time to kill rodents and to clean toilets. If a firm knows that they won't be held accountable for dirty toilets and dirty kitchens, will they clean them? I was talking to one guy who says the food's more authentic if you do that. It's funny. We can come back to that. That you didn't laugh is a bad sign. Drop the class. So did anyone understand what he just said? There are cost curves. How many of you have taken a course in economics? As you sat there sleeping, did you ever think about what a cost curve is? To hire an exterminator, do exterminators work for free? When an exterminator walks in, do I just wink at him and he says, I'm working for free for you, handsome? These guys charge you. If you're not rewarded for hiring the exterminator, will you hire the exterminator? Why isn't my company rewarded? So I run an Italian restaurant, an Italian-Jewish restaurant. Will I hire the exterminator? What is the benefits of hiring the exterminator? He kills some bugs and creatures. What's the cost? It costs me money to pay him. Does anyone understand what I'm saying? Will I hire him? I won't hire him if customers don't know what goes on in my kitchen. Folks, why don't customers know what goes on in my kitchen? What's the private information, people? Private information won Akerlof, Stiglitz, and Spence a Nobel Prize 13 years ago. Have you ever heard those words before? When you walk into a restaurant, what don't you know? The hostess is attractive. The tables are clean. The menu doesn't have any spit or stuff from the nose on it. Is it a clean restaurant? What don't you know? You don't know what goes on in the kitchen. It's private information. Why don't you walk in? If I ever take you out to dinner, we will walk into the kitchen. Go meet the cooks, the guys who clean up, say, hey, how's it going? Sign some autographs, show them my tattoos, and walk out. You don't know what you're eating. My mother-in-law doesn't go out to restaurants because she doesn't trust anyone. Los Angeles had diarrhea because of an asymmetry. Restaurants knew that customers didn't know which restaurants had clean kitchens. It was costly to have a clean kitchen, and so some restaurants were clean, some were dirty, and there was a lot of diarrhea. The public health authorities create the report card. They send trained men and women who are trained in public health to give folks, what's the difference between an A and a C restaurant? I'm going to have to start speaking faster, but I can't see if you understand a word I'm saying. The A restaurant has a clean kitchen. There's a whole bunch of objective criteria. Folks, in Phil Leslie's empirical work, what did he document? The event was in homework 2, you're going to study the event of the Clean Air Act and whether that has a causal impact on reducing air pollution. You should have already studied that. Phil Leslie's event is going to be the introduction of the report card, of giving each restaurant in Los Angeles an A, B, or C, and forcing them to hang those grades at their front door, my yawning students. What empirical fact did Phil Leslie document? Use the words diarrhea in a sentence. Yo. Thank you, Justin. If we made a graph, the count of diarrhea fell sharply at the date when the report cards were introduced. Folks, what happened on the supply and demand side? Is this just Harry Potter? Did little drinking Daniel whatever wave his wand? What happened on the supply and demand side once the report cards are common knowledge? Are you talking about demand or supply? 3 seconds.
Demand.
On the demand side, what did consumers do?
They now have the demand for knowing.
Did they go to the A or C restaurant?
The A.
They stopped going to C restaurants. Folks, you ran a C restaurant. You now have no customers. What do? You get cleaner. This is how information and capitalism, because of a government nudge, solves the problem. There was diarrhea in our restaurants. Rather than all we needed to solve the problem was trusted information, like a Zagat's, but for diarrhea. When that information was revealed, on the demand side, consumers substituted away from the C restaurants to the A restaurants, and firms who had C ratings, recognizing they would lose business if they didn't up their game, brought in the exterminator and killed the rats. Folks, let's cheer. This is government's role as trusted source of information. Does anyone not understand? Mercury in fish. If you're a pregnant woman and you eat mercury, you could screw your kid up. This is new knowledge from toxology in public health. So if you Google, there was a public health advisory that women shouldn't be eating fish when pregnant because there's mercury in the fish. Folks, what did Jay Shimshak do in a series of empirical papers? You have 3 seconds. Don't ask who Jay Shimshak is. He's an economist at Tulane. You don't get any points for knowing that. What did he do? What's the interesting causal question? Got 2 words for you, and I'm on tape. Drop the class. I will find a set of students who can hang with me. It's Charles. And who else? Just me and Charles. You're a pregnant woman. You've been given this information. What do? You stop eating fish. So what did he see when he looked at the data? Start to think like a statistician. Start to think. What did he see in the time series? Sales of fish fell sharply. Folks, who reduced their consumption of fish the most among pregnant women? Are all pregnant women equal? What's a dimension that pregnant women differ on that matters? And don't tell me hair color. Yes. So she said education. Let's partition that into low and high education. So there's USC people who are low and UCLA people who are high. On both counts. Which group responds more to this information? The highly educated. So a problem with information regulation is that it's actually regressive. Less educated people are less likely to respond to it. Educated people are more likely to respond to new information. And so inequality actually goes up. Something to think about. Who still smokes? I bet only 3 people in this room smoke. You can tell me later who you are. I bet I can guess. Toxic release inventory is a famous example of information regulation. Toxic release inventory requires that manufacturers in the United States announce that manufacturing plants have to release information on how much pollution they release to the air, water, and land. Folks, who would find it very valuable to know how much pollution is being emitted by each company? Do I have any future community activists? President Obama made his name as a community organizer. What do community organizers do? Does anyone here have a social justice bone in your body? Or you think you're all heading to Wall Street? Based on your ability to calculate, I don't think so. What do social justice advocates do? They protect their community if their community's under siege. Folks, how do you know if your community's under siege? The toxic release inventory would let you know whether the local factories are polluting the air and water. Does anyone understand? If you don't have this information, how do you know? Folks, smog alert days. Matt Nidell of UCLA wrote a great thesis. How many of you are baseball fans? So I'll talk to the dudes in the room. Where is Dodger Stadium? Is it in a nice part of LA? It's in the east part of the LA, just north of the city, in a smoggy place. Matt Nidell did something brilliant in his UCLA thesis, and he's tenured at Columbia based basically on what I'm about to say. Folks, he collected daily data on attendance at Dodger Stadium. Why is that kind of interesting? When you go to a baseball game, is the Los Angeles Stadium a dome or a stadium? Is it indoor or outdoor? The Dodgers play outside. If the stadium's in a smoggy place, how many hours are you going to sit there? So when I throw a pitch, I usually get off the mound, I itch myself, I have my tobacco, meet with the third baseman, then go back to the mound. How many hours is a baseball game these days, dudes? It's 4.5 hours. I'll take a break. So when you go to a baseball game, you are investing many, many hours to be outside. Folks, what did Matt Nidell do in his study related to baseball? He also did it at the zoo, but the zoo's not sexy. You guys really want me to do all the work. At other schools I've taught it, I had 100 people talking. That may be where I got to go. Here's what he did. Can anyone see what I'm doing? Put on this axis smog. Put on this axis. No. This is not good at all. I should have said put smog alert on this axis and put on this axis the level of smog. Folks, here's the key point, and you need to know this. This is smog, S-M-O-G. Smog is an indicator of pollution. Folks, if there is zero pollution, that means it's very clean. If it's out here, this means it's very polluted. The way the Los Angeles smog alert works is the following. If smog exceeds this critical threshold, folks, if you get over an A on your final, if you get over a 95, that's an A. If you get under a 95, that ain't an A. There's certain critical threshold points. Los Angeles has a critical threshold right here where if air pollution exceeds this level, it is a smog alert day, while if it's just below, it isn't. Here is what so the way to do this is the following. The probability that a smog alert day is announced is 1 if the outdoor smog is greater than the threshold. It's 0 if it's less than this. So does everyone understand the rule for what triggers a smog alert day? Here is the brilliance of what he did, and this would be a good exam question because I'm seeing lots of stupid eyes. I want you all looking at me with admiration. You don't need to like me. My job is to make you smarter. Folks, what is brilliant about comparing attendance at Los Angeles Stadium on days when the smog is at this level versus when it's at this level? Call this point A, call this point B. On day A, is it smoggy outside? Everyone say, yes, professor. But is it a smog alert? It just missed. B, is it smoggy outside? Is it a smog alert day? So what did Nidell do as his UCLA thesis? And if you guys are smart, this would be the way. This is called a regression discontinuity. For those of you who know calculus, does everyone see the discontinuity to the function? How many of you have taken calculus? Ooh, all right, young Terrence Towes. Do you see this is not a continuous function? There's a jump in the derivative. The derivative isn't smooth. Does anyone see that? What does he do with the data? I need to pick up speed. He shows that attendance at Dodger Stadium is much lower on B days than A days. Attendance at Dodger Stadium is much lower on B days. Both sets of days are smoggy, but B just being a slight bit higher smoggy in a delta epsilon proof triggers a smog alert. Folks, what is your inference about human behavior? What just happened? What's the link to information regulation? Whoa. Someone make a causal statement. You, young lady. So, or say it differently, what did people do on days when they knew it was a smog alert day? They didn't go to the game, which is the same as staying inside. They engaged in self-protection. One way to protect the population from pollution is for government to solve the problem, shut down the factory. Another way that government can solve the externality problem is to reduce the population's exposure by providing information. For the same smog outside, people can be exposed to less pollution if they stay inside. And Nidell's great work with this very sophisticated regression discontinuity design yielded just that finding. And this got him tenure at Columbia, and this was an excellent UCLA thesis. What is happening? And that is the power of government at work, of how government can improve your life. Folks, now I want to talk about lawyers. This is not in the book, and this is experimental. So you got to pay attention. How many of you plan to be lawyers? I'm a professor at the law school. Good, it's the two of us. All right. My mommy's a lawyer. I've helped her win several cases over the time. She wouldn't listen to me. But then she listened to me. So what liability is the following. Have any of you ever bought a product that did not perform as you expected it to? Whether it's a professor or a car. What I want to talk about is having the right to sue. When you have a government and when there are courts, lawyers can offer benefits. Government can offer benefits by having a fair legal system. An unfair legal system would be if outcomes are not random. Let's do this example. So a restaurant has a choice. We're back to the restaurant case. A restaurant has a choice. It can make your salad with clean tomatoes or dirty tomatoes. Folks, there's going to be asymmetric information. The clean ones cost $10 each, while the dirty ones cost $1 each. If the restaurant is a cost minimizer, which tomatoes are they going to use? The dirty tomatoes. Folks, what consequence is that going to have? You, sucker, don't know which tomato you have been served. Do I have any tomato experts here? I didn't think so. We can talk about UCLA football. I could help Jim Mora. I could call the plays. There's ways to use randomness and randomization to fake out a defense. We will talk about game theory later. If you are served the dirty tomato, your probability of getting sick is 20%. For those of you who don't know probability, that means for every 100 tomatoes you eat, you get sick 20 times. Is that cool? If you get served the clean tomato, you only get sick 1 out of 100 times. Which tomato would you like? Which tomato are they likely to serve you? We're going to talk about how if you introduce liability for being served a bad meal, you can induce the company to serve the clean tomatoes. The threat of a lawsuit when there is a bad outcome can incentivize a for-profit company to take the costly action of buying the more expensive tomato. That's going to be the punchline of this economy. Folks, any questions on the setup? Yes?
Is there any threat of customers not returning?
So that's excellent. So he just said something brilliant. In PhD economics, you would focus on what he just said, which is the following. You actually don't need liability if it's a repeated game. A repeated game is if I say to a restaurant, if you ever poison me, I'll never come back. Does everyone understand my threat? If you ever disappoint me, I'll never show up for class again. You guys would prepare more if that's a credible threat. If you ever disappoint me with a bad meal, I'll never come back as a customer. If the restaurant viewed that as a credible threat, you would not need the courts because patient companies who value future profits, would serve the more expensive tomato because they would be more likely to have future business. So to repeat his point, if customers who get sick credibly threaten to never show up again, then a company who values its future profits will provide the clean tomatoes even though they're more expensive because they know if they provide the dirty tomatoes, they're likely to lose a lot of business. He's absolutely right. And that's a crucial point. So let's do this. We're going to play a one-shot game. Folks, if there was no government, the way to think about the benefits of government is to think about what would be achieved if there were no government. If there is no government, and if this is a one-shot game, the restaurant is likely to use the low-quality tomatoes because that will maximize its profits, because that reduces its costs. Because what's missing here is that the firm's revenue is not tied to the tomato quality because the customer, there's asymmetric information. The customer doesn't know which tomato the restaurant is using. The restaurant knows that, and that gives the restaurant an incentive to use the low-quality tomato. Any questions? We're going to introduce liability and solve the problem. So the equilibrium to this game when there's no government in a one-shot game is that the restaurant is going to use the low-quality tomatoes and people are going to get sick 20% of the time. Folks, here is what the law can do. Suppose that you suffer F dollars. F is an integer between 0 and infinity. For example, it could be $100. Suppose you suffer F dollars worth of damage when you are sick. Then, from basic probability theory, the expected damage to you if they serve you a dirty tomato is 0.2 times F. Can somebody explain where that came from? You actually worked on this in homework 1 in the last question. Notice how everything comes together. Everything we do is 1. That's why economics is so easy for some and just baffling and boring to others. But look at my pay. We're paid very well. Where did this number come from? times multiplied by the punishment of what happens to you in that state of the world. So to repeat his point, there's a 20% chance of you getting sick, and if you are sick, then you suffer F dollars worth of damage. Folks, consider the following law. Suppose that Jerry Brown writes the following law. When a restaurant customer gets sick, they can sue the restaurant and collect 0.3 times F. I just made up that law. If you run the restaurant, when would that induce you to provide the high quality tomato? And actually, I skipped this point in the math. That wasn't good to me. Folks, I'm going to need to fix this because I'm missing one line of code, but let's do this together. If you were a profit-maximizing businesswoman and you recognize that you face this liability structure, will you now, it's uncertain whether you will provide the clean tomato. Why? What is the cost of providing the clean tomato? Folks, does everyone see that the marginal cost is $9? The salad has to have a tomato. What's the extra cost you incur if you go with the clean tomato? Can everyone take 10 and subtract 1? Does anyone understand the great professor? That's the marginal cost of playing by the rules. What's the marginal? Oh, so now we have it. You would compare 0.3 times F to $9. So if F is greater than, so which way do we do it? As long as F is gosh, I'm getting bad on my feet. You will be punished this amount if you cheat, 0.3 times F. You will have to pay $9 as the restaurant owner if you play by the rules. So as long, F equals 27 is the key amount. And let's look at this for another second. As long as the fine is greater than $27, as long as F is greater than $27, this guy, 0.3 times F, will incentivize the restaurant to go green. Let me do that again for everyone. I apologize, that took me a second. Folks, does everyone agree with the following? If the value of F is greater than 27, then this amount is greater than 9. You will be sued for more than $9 if you purchase the bad tomato. On average, you're going to be sued that amount. It costs you $9 to buy the clean tomato. You are incentivized to buy the clean tomato. Does everyone understand? You will double check that. Folks, now let's go to energy and let's see if I can pick up a little bit of speed. I'm switching topics again. As we talked about at the start of the hour, another power of government is to set energy and water prices. We talked about Jerry Brown and the Public Utility Commission. Government has the unique power to set water and electricity prices. Folks, can government set the price of a Starbucks coffee? Can government set USC's tuition? Government sets UCLA's tuition. And there's a debate, what's the optimal tuition? You guys could have some decent professors if tuition went up. I wouldn't have to be here. You'd have somebody else. A superior Kahn with hair, who cared, who showed up. Oh, I'm having office hours today. We will come back to that. Government has to make a decision for electricity and water prices. Should prices be set low? Should prices be set high? They're not using supply and demand to set these. They just set these. I want to talk about a specific example. Folks, how many of you have read this great paper by my Chinese friends? He's a Chinese guy at Peking University. He's an Israeli guy. He's at MIT. And he's at Tsinghua. They wrote a paper that came. How many of you subscribe to PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences? This was just published. Evidence, tell me if this is a sexy title, Evidence on the Impact of Sustained Exposure to Air Pollution on Life Expectancy from China's, I always mispronounce this, how do we pronounce this? Let's call it the Hoy River. And that's, here's the story, folks. There is a river in China, which I have never whitewatered raft on, called the Huai River. If you live north of this river, you get free heating during winter. Folks, is that good or bad? So you get free heating. For those who don't live, has anyone here ever lived in a cold place? In cold places, you need heating. It was a legacy of communism in China, is that people who live north of the river get free heating. Folks, who's a beneficiary of free heating? Poor, cold people. And China used to have a lot of these folks. So do folks see that there was benefits of that policy? But folks, as environmentalists, what is an unintended consequence of offering free power? They used coal. They used coal-fired power plants for hour after hour after hour. Folks, what environmental consequences are there from using coal? The authors document the following. This paper's findings suggest that an arbitrary Chinese policy, notice that this is government, and that policy was the free winter heating, that greatly increased total suspended particulates, PM10, caused 500 million residents of northern China to lose 2.5 billion life years. Folks, is that funny? Even and I find humor in everything. I find no humor there. So an unintended consequence of the Chinese Communist Party hoping to improve the quality of life of poor people was, folks, if your nation has 1 million people, I can't even do the math, each of them has lost 1,500 years of life. That's a lot of life. You'd be like Yoda. Hey, do you see how many years of life this is? If each of us lived to 100, that means that they killed 25 million people. Yes. The quasi-experimental evidence approach is based on China's river, which provided free winter heating via the provision of coal for boilers in cities north of the river, but denied heat to the south. So folks, their control group are cities. They studied more, just like this, they did a regression discontinuity. The treatment group was cities just north of this river that had elevated particulate levels because of this policy. The control group were cities just south of this river, still in cold places, that did not have access to the subsidy. So folks, was this public policy good or bad? We don't know. But it's our job as economists to measure the unintended consequences. And so my point is that these slides fall under this question of when governments set prices too low, when governments set prices low, there are winners and losers, and it's our job as empiricists to quantify these. Let's do an example closer to home. Yes? Yes? So that's a brilliant question. He's basically saying that there's contamination of the experiment. That is a brilliant question. I had the same question. They spend a fair bit of their paper claiming that there wasn't. So folks, he's asking an atmospheric chemistry paper. He's saying, Professor, if there's cities south of the Huai River if air pollution from the north blows over to the south, then those cities closest to the treated cities might have worse air pollution. That would actually be biased against their finding, because they are viewing the South as a control group. Your point is that the South might become more polluted. Those northern southern cities might be more polluted because of this policy, and that's like the control group being treated. So in terms of basic statistics, your point is that they're underestimating this effect. I can talk to you after class about that if you don't understand. Folks, what do you see on the screen? This is called, does everyone see a staircase? Should we sing Stairway to Heaven together? There's a lady who's sure all that glitters is gold. Heaven. Here's what you're seeing. This is a nonlinear function. Folks, kilowatts are the units which we measure electricity in, kilowatt hours. If you're a very poor household and you only consume this amount of power, look at the domain of the function. I want you to see the cut points here and here. Folks, in terms of calculus, do you see a jump in the function at here and here? This is called a 3-step increasing block tariff. This is common in California. If you ask your parents to see their water bill or their electricity bill, it has this format. Folks, on the vertical axis is price per kilowatt, the average price of electricity. Folks, a question. Why do we set this up this way for residential consumers? Who's a winner of this pricing structure? Poor people. Poor people tend to not consume much electricity. Do you see that they pay a relatively low? So notice that the marginal price of electricity is low, and then when you cross some threshold, it jumps. Folks, if you have a mansion and you're over here, your total electricity bill is the integral. Price times quantity here, plus price times quantity here, plus price times quantity here. We protect, just one second, we protect poor people. If you want to protect poor people, you could set this price lower and lower so that they're paying very little and only those poor people who consume more over here. So question, do the electric utilities know who is rich and poor? No. The electric utilities know your zip code. They know your coastal zone, but they don't know who's rich and poor. There's the presumption in California that those who consume relatively little water and electricity are consuming very little, are here, and you can protect them by having a very low price. Folks, what's inefficient about this pricing scheme? If you're Kim Kardashian, what does she pay for her first units here? Same amount as a poor person pays. And so this isn't targeting prices by income. This is this weird targeting by kilowatts. Let me make a second point. So this was a definitional point. Here's why I'm going to skip this slide in the name of time. Peter Glick is an important water expert. I want you to here's why I said this. Folks, California has drought issues. How many of you in environmental classes have heard about mega drought? Currently, the price of water in Los Angeles Department of Water and Power is ½ cent a gallon. Folks, how much is a gallon of beer? Is it ½ cent? If we have scarce water, what would an economist say is a way to reduce water scarcity in LA? Where do we use half of our water? Outside. Why is there so much green grass in Los Angeles? If we replaced all of that with desert or native plants, there'd be no drought. We have no incentive to do so because we set the price artificially low. So many economists, including myself, and we're going to talk about this later in the course, would say that the way to reduce electricity, we worry about power blackouts, we worry about water scarcity. All you have to do is raise the prices, especially in these upper tiers. That would be the way to solve the crisis. Use basic economics. If water is scarce, raise its price. Folks, ½ cent a gallon is pretty low. When I give this lecture, many people come back and say, you are being cruel to the poor. If we raise the price of water, you're going to hurt the poor. Folks, can I show you how to protect the poor and teach you something from public finance? Would you like to see an economist help the world? We're not good people, but we're 2 steps smarter than everyone else. And if people will listen to us, we can solve many problems. Here we go. Suppose that a public health expert says that every person needs X gallons of water a day for bathing and washing and other essential services. Everybody say X. So if there's 4 people in your household, and even if you're the poorest of the poor, you need to have 4 times X gallons. Folks, can we agree that a philosopher could solve for this number? Does X have to be infinity? Can we agree that there is some number X such that that is the minimum you need to bathe and wash? Here is what a libertarian would say. Here's what we're about to do, folks. I'm going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and I'm watching some of you sleep. Just watch me on videotape. I can't watch you when you watch from tape. If the price, let's set the price of water at p cents per gallon. So rather than at 0.5 cents, let's set it at 3 cents per gallon. In that case, we're going to need to give each poor person, so where did this 100 come from? Oh, I see. I want to talk about the number 365 times p times x divided by 100. Folks, where did that number come from? The poor people are very poor, and I'm now forcing them to pay p cents per gallon. Can somebody be fast on their feet and tell me what a cash transfer of 365 times p times x divided by 100? P was measured in pennies. What is the everyone stare at this. This would be a good exam question. I would set this up, I would give you this equation and say, what problem has the economist just solved? 5 points, you've got 3 minutes. I'm sorry?
The price of water per day.
Yes! Since no one understood what you just said, say it again.
Price of water per day.
In English. What have you just done? What have we done together? We have given this person enough money so that they could buy X each day. Folks, X times P is the amount of money in pennies they will need to buy. There's 365 days in a year. 365 times P times X is the number of pennies you would need to buy X gallons per year. Divide by 100 to turn that into dollars. I have just given each poor person enough money to buy the essential water. So folks, notice the following, and I don't have time for questions. We got to pick up speed. I'm making everyone pay market prices. No more communism. I'm giving everyone enough income to buy their baseline level at market prices. That's how we work. Now, folks, does money grow on trees? Who's going to pay for this, my young liberal friends? The non-poor. And folks, this is the field of public finance. When government runs a deficit, we have to run balanced budgets. We can't borrow money from China forever. The theory of public finance is that the present discounted value of expenditure equals the present discounted value of revenue. In a one-period game, expenditure has to equal revenue. If there are Z poor people in the economy, and if there are N taxpayers, what is this equation? And this is what the exams are going to be, people. If you're going to get D's on them, drop. I could use your seats. What is this equation? What's your intuition? A good economist can look at a formula and know what it is immediately. Yes? Excellent. That's an A answer, and he's done. To repeat what he just said, what this ratio represents is for each non-poor taxpayer what they're going to have to pay in yearly taxes to pay for the poor people's water. For each at market prices, each of the poor people needs X gallons that cost P units each. There's 365 days. There's Z poor people. This numerator is the total expenditure on poor people's water. You turn it into dollars by dividing by 100. You spread it across each of the taxpayers. And that's the tax burden. Money doesn't grow on trees. If you're going to be nice to poor people, someone's going to have to pay. And I think it is good to help poor people, but money does not grow on trees. Sir? So what he's correct about, so he's saying, Professor, there's a little bit of double jeopardy here. The non-poor are going to pay the market price P for water, and they're going to have to pay this subsidy. And that's the field of political economy. Are we generous people? Do we care about the poor? But folks, notice, abstracting from the political economy point he just made, I just achieved two goals. I efficiently priced water at P cents a gallon, protecting our water supply, encouraging conservation, which we're not achieving at a half cent, and every poor person continues to have basic decency. Are we a society willing to do that? And we can discuss that, but that is how economists think. Folks, we got to keep going. I've got, it's going to take me 12 more minutes to get through everything. We're moving too slow. Another thing that government does is provide public goods. I wrote a famous paper with Sichi that just came out in the PNAS about bullet trains. And folks, I have nothing nice to say about California's bullet trains. This is about China's bullet trains. So, it used to be the case. How many of you have been to Beijing? How many of you have been to Tianjin? I've been to both. It used to take 75 minutes before the bullet train was built to get from Beijing to Tianjin. So we can look within Beijing, and the bullet train connected Tianjin to Beijing. There's bullet trains, of course, in Shanghai and Guangzhou. The bullet train, distance equals speed times time. Time equals distance divided by speed. If you can move it more than twice the speed, the time it takes sharply shrinks between cities. Folks, what did Sichi and I study? What is a benefit to China's economy from having trains, these publicly provided trains? Who was a winner from these very fast trains? We call those the second-tier cities that are in the sweet spot. They're too close to the superstar cities to fly to them, but they're too far to drive. Planes move at 500 miles per hour. Cars move at 60 miles per hour. This train moves at 220 miles per hour. And so we documented that land prices go up sharply in those second-tier cities. How in the heck do you pronounce this? Chiga? All right. I've never been there. But it's just what Justin said. When you provide public goods, these effectively become suburbs of the superstar cities. Landowners and people who live in these cities have increased access to the superstar cities. That reduces congestion in Guangzhou, Shanghai, and Beijing and improves quality of life. China's bullet trains facilitate market integration and mitigate the cost of megacity growth. Read this paper. I will post this. This is going to be an important paper. So I just mentioned that a major topic in modern economics is called economic incidence. Let me hear you say those words. When there is an improvement in environmental quality, who gains? Folks, I'll give an example, and I think I mentioned this in one of our first lectures. In New York City, Harlem used to have a terrible crime problem. When murder rates declined in Harlem, did all the African American households who lived there gain? Who gained from the reduction in crime in Harlem, New York? And who complained that their neighborhood had been destroyed by the reduction in crime? How could a reduction in crime destroy a neighborhood? For those who don't know economics, it's baffling. For those who know economics, it's funny. What's the answer? I know she knows. Someone not in the first three rows. I don't know what goes on, selection versus treatment with these rows. So as crime fell, never forget your supply and demand. Folks, is there a lot of land in Manhattan? No. The supply curve for land is almost vertical. Folks, does the demand or supply curve shift as in Harlem? Does the demand or supply? When crime falls in Harlem, what happens to the market for Harlem real estate? Demand to live there goes up as yuppies want to live there. If supply of housing is inelastic, what happens to price? Who can no longer live in their neighborhood? Renters. You can Google in the New York Times that black renters have been angry that they've been priced out of their Harlem. They've been priced out as yuppies like you have moved in and bidded up the price. You have to be very smart. When public goods improve, the same things happened in East LA. Randy Walsh had a paper that as the Clean Air Act has reduced pollution in East LA, certain Hispanic neighborhoods have been gentrified as folks have moved in. Around USC, the same thing's going on. USC used to be a very, very tough neighborhood. As crime and pollution have fallen around there, the president of USC is ecstatic, but the owners of land in the neighborhood are getting rich. The renters in the neighborhood are being priced out and are quite angry. And it all comes back to this picture. When you know just a little bit of economics, you become very smart and you can see the future. And that's called economic incidence. Economic incidence is the idea from public finance and environmental economics. When public goods improve, whether it's a bullet train, whether it's a reduction in crime, whether it's a reduction in pollution, who are the winners and losers? If land is inelastically supplied, it's going to be the landowners. Here's the last thing we need to do today, and this is going to be hard, but this is going to pop up on exams, and let's see how you do. And let me catch my breath. This is written up carefully in the book, in chapter 3. And let's see if you can understand any of this. How many of you care about bald eagles? Have any of you ever seen a bald eagle? All right. Where'd you see it? Alaska? It's interesting. Can you bring one to class? Here's what we're going to do. This whole lecture has been about the value of government, the role that government plays in our life and in the environment. We're going to ask the following question. We as a society are going to have a choice. Does one bald eagle live, 2 bald eagles, or 3? How many folks are hoping that 3 soar? They're going to form interesting couples, but it's the eagles can't go extinct, but can I have any environmentalist boo if only 1 bald eagle is protected? Folks, there's going to be no government. There's just going to be 3 people called Matt, Jill, and Frank. And they're going to have to make a decision together about protecting bald eagles. Folks, is protecting bald eagles a free lunch? All of these numbers are measured in dollars. Watch the old crazy professor and learn something. Is protecting bald eagles a free lunch? As you increase the number, how much does it cost society to keep 1 bald eagle flying? $50. How much does it cost society to keep 2 bald eagles flying around? The marginal cost is 60, 110 minus 50. Notice that marginal cost is increasing. To protect the third bald eagle, you got to pay 300. Folks, there are only 3 people in this economy named Matt, Jill, and Frank. WTP is not a motor oil or a rock band. It is willingness to pay. It is not the Stone Temple Pilots either. There is Matt, Jill, and Frank. Folks, who's the environmentalist among the 3? Matt's the environmentalist. How do you immediately know that? How do you see the intensity of my preferences here? I have an intense preference for 3/4 of you to drop. Matt is willing to pay more than 3 times as much as Jill to protect one bald eagle. Does everyone see that 100 is more than 3 times 30? Folks, does everyone see the diminishing returns? How much is he willing to pay? How much extra is he willing to pay for the second bald eagle? Can you calculate this minus this divided by this minus this? From your basic intro econ, his marginal given that one bald eagle has been protected, he's willing to pay 50 for the second eagle and 20 for the third. Does anyone see that? Jill is the hater. Women can become the head of the Fed. They can also hate bald eagles. It's not that she hates them. It's probably an opportunity cost. She could use that money to go out on a date with Sally. Her marginal willingness to pay for an eagle is 10. Her marginal willingness to pay, given that she has 2 bald eagles, she's willing to pay 5 for the third. Frank is in between. Folks, why do I add up horizontally? The key idea from public goods that Paul Samuelson made famous 70 years ago is we add up. These are the only 3 people in society. Why do I add up their willingness to pay? You guys slept through all your econ classes. Why do I add up their willingness to pay? What's the definition of a public good? What's the definition of a public good? We can all enjoy it at the same time. If there's one bald eagle, how happy is Frank? He's willing to pay $100 for that eagle. Jill is willing to pay 30. Frank is willing to pay 50. We add this up. Folks, should one bald eagle exist? Because society values the eagle more than it costs to keep it, because there's $130 worth of consumer surplus, at least one eagle will exist. Folks, what is society's favorite choice here? Which of the 3 choices maximizes the difference between this and this? Does everyone see it's 2 bald eagles? So do we need government? So we've now solved that 2 bald eagles is the social optimum. Folks, if there's no government, how are we going to get this done? Suppose that Matt, Jill, and Frank don't know each other. How are they going to finance this? What's going to happen? And let us assume that each of these guys knows their own willingness to pay, but does not know the other guy's willingness to pay. So Matt knows this column, but he doesn't know this column or this column. Jill knows this column, but she doesn't know this column or this column. Frank knows this column, but he doesn't know Jill's or Matt's willingness to pay. Folks, what's going to happen? Can someone use the word free riding in a sentence? This course really stinks so bad. You will determine whether I stay here. Ouch. So I guess no one read chapter 3. This is verbatim in the book. That's called a revelation mechanism. People reveal their types from the information signals they send. I don't know which of you have read the chapter. By your slow answering of this question, I immediately infer you haven't read it, because this example is verbatim in the book. So hippies, let's play it like this, because I want to leave. Here's how we're going to do it. A collection plate's going to be put out. And it's going to be put right here. And Matt, Jill, and Frank are going to agree that they're each going to contribute money, and then however much money is in the hat, if it exceeds $50, one eagle will be, if it's greater than 50 but less than 110, one eagle will be protected. If it's greater than 110 but less than 300, 2 eagles will be protected. And if it's greater than or equal to 300, 3 eagles will be protected. Folks, is any money going to be in the hat? Why does economic theory predict that no money will be in the hat? And this is the free rider problem. Because
everyone thinks that the other person's going to pay?
each of these guys are going to say to themselves the following. There's an opportunity cost for putting that money in the hat. Jill's going to say, if I put in 0, Matt and Frank look like two losers to me. If these suckers each kick in $56 each, I will still have all my money, and there will be two bald eagles. But folks, this is a symmetric game. They will all be thinking that. How much money will be in the pot? So when the point of this, and I see we're ending on a low note, and that's very bad. I'm going to cut my office hour by half an hour. So my office hour will be at 4 o'clock today in PP 6347, in Public Policy 6347. If there is no government, it is highly unlikely you're going to reach the efficient equilibrium. There's going to be free riding, and it's possible that you won't even collect $50. Folks, what can government do to solve this problem? What is the unique power of government? So the value of government is to think by counterfactual. Government has value if you reach a suboptimal equilibrium if there is no government. We have now formally defined the free rider problem. What can government do? Yes. So, we could be a little bit more democratic. So we just did this slide. We're not going to get there. Let me end on the following. Folks, government could have the following political referendum. Government could ask the following question. There are 3 members of the society, and it costs $110 to protect 2 eagles. Folks, what would be the tax price? Can everyone take 110 and divide it by 3, and that equals roughly 35? Does everyone agree that 110 divided by 3 is 35? If each of these 3 people paid proportionately the 110, like 3 people going out to dinner together and sharing the bill, if I said to these 3 people, will you vote yes for the following proposition? I will charge you $35 and I will provide 2 eagles to society. Folks, will Matt vote yes for that? Because 150 is greater than 35, yes. Will Jill vote yes? Will Frank vote yes? We have 100% vote for the referendum. Government has the ability to commit to a tax and public good bundle. The tax guarantees that enough revenue is paid to cover the cost, and then you could put it up for election rather than being a dictator and cramming this down people's throats. You could propose to the people this, and they would vote. So you have homework due on Monday, and we are going to jump into Chapter 4 on where do factories choose to go. For any business people in the room, if you ever open a business in the future, we're going to talk about site selection and its implications for environmental economics.